Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. This is one of those reviews I want to just jump right into. For my second review for October, I decided to watch TsumaSho, which is an abbreviation. This is one of those anime that has a fairly long Japanese title, which translates roughly to "My wife turned into an elementary school student." I wanted to get that little detail out of the way right away because I swear it's not actually as bad as that sounds. TsumaSho opens on the tale of a classic love story. Awkward businessman Keisuke Nijima quickly falls for his much bolder, more put-together co-worker Takai. The two have a whirlwind romance, and pretty soon they're married and have a daughter named Mai. For a good long while, these three were the definition of a picture-perfect, happy family. But then, when Mai looked to be about 16, Takai died in an accident. The present-day story actually takes place 10 years later, where it's revealed that Keisuke never really recovered from his wife's death and has been living as a shell of himself ever since. Until one day, when a young girl named Marika Shiraishi shows up on their doorstep and promptly barges into their home, announcing that she's Takai's reincarnation and that she abruptly got her memories of her first life back one day after passing by the house and seeing the sorry state of her old family. She has enough personal memories of things like family vacations that Marika couldn't possibly know that there was never any real reason to doubt her claims. So she swiftly gets to work putting their lives back in order, and doing her best to find a way to fit back into their lives, juggling all the awkward scenarios of being a 10-year-old with no reason to have any connection to them as far as the rest of the world is concerned. There are a lot of elements to this story, but there's one more major character we need to discuss before we get into them: Marika's mother, Chika. This show was really great at painting an atmosphere with its lighting and colors and music. The sun shines differently as soon as Takai comes back into their lives, and when we see her go home, back into Marika's life for the first time, as soon as she spots Chika's shoes by the door and realizes she didn't get home first, it's like you can feel the whole scene holding its breath. The Nijimas were a picture-perfect family. Things in the Shiraishi household are not so great, to put it simply. Takai actually remembers very little about Marika's life up until this point. The basics are that her parents are recently divorced, and her dad's nowhere to be found these days, leaving Chika struggling to work enough hours at a soul-crushing fast food job to try and support them both. And unfortunately, she often takes out her frustrations on her daughter, so it doesn't take Takai long to learn to walk on eggshells around her. But Chika's character, and their whole dynamic, is kinda complicated. It really surprised me how much time the series spent exploring and trying to redeem her. I totally understand anyone who's not willing to forgive her. She's done some things that I agree shouldn't be forgiven. But I do also think TsumaSho succeeded in making her a surprisingly sympathetic character, someone I wanted to root for once she does dedicate herself to moving on and being a better mother, someone who realizes and acknowledges how badly she's fucked up. Chika is paranoid and verbally abusive at the start, but always stops short of crossing that line into physical abuse. She's usually stopped by memories of her own mother, which is how we learn that she grew up in a household that was even more broken than her current one. So as a teenager, she dreamed of nothing more than her own kids having the kind of happy home she never got to experience. We never meet Marika's dad, but I definitely felt the secondhand heartbreak as she related back the end of their marriage, how she was compromising more and more to try and preserve that dream, only to find out he was cheating on her. At the time we meet her, the dreams come crashing down around her, and it doesn't excuse her taking it out on her daughter, but it did make it a little more understandable, how she reached such a low point. I mentioned I was surprised at how much effort the series put into redeeming her, but I was equally surprised at how patient and generous Takai was towards her. Even if Chika had been a great mother, I would have expected some friction there. A grown woman used to being responsible for her own child suddenly having to relearn the boundaries and restrictions of being the child again. but she's really sympathetic about Chika's struggles without having even half the information the audience gets. Which speaks to one of the bigger points I wanted to make. It definitely gets dark and depressing at times, but TsumaSho was a really uplifting, feel-good show most of the time, and a lot of that had to do with the cast of really supportive minor characters. On both sides, Chika has this really great, motherly older woman at work who connects with her over having grown up in a single-parent household herself. And all of Keisuke's co-workers seem to really respect and admire him. It sounds like some of them stuck their necks out to make sure he could keep his job during the early days of his grief. This anime just oozes forgiveness and support and optimism, despite exploring a lot of serious topics. Earlier this year, I reviewed an anime called 365 Days to the Wedding, and these series really started to feel like two sides of the same coin. One with a focus on beginnings, and the other endings, but with nearly identical uplifting tones, offset by the occasional serious issue bringing it all back down to earth. It was a really cool realization when I noticed that they came out not only in the same year, but during the same anime season even. If you've seen one but not the other, I recommend adding the one you missed to your list. They complement each other really nicely with their discussions of family and marriage. Specifically, whether it's worth getting that close to someone, knowing it'll make it that much more painful if anything were to happen. 365 Days is about two people learning to take that plunge for the first time, and TsumaSho is about learning how to recover when that something happens. To be honest, for a good chunk of this series, I didn't like Keisuke much more than Chika. He was a little pathetic for my tastes. I can sympathize with being immobilized by grief, but for 10 years, they were way past the point of needing to try therapy or medication or something by the time Takai finally steps back in. He talks about feeling like his life was frozen in time at the moment of her death, but it started to feel like his growth was put on pause a lot earlier than that. Their relationship is sweet, but I almost couldn't help feeling like it wasn't good for him in a way. He simply could not function without her. Keisuke really lays into Chika when he discovers how bad things are at home, and I couldn't help judging him for that too. Where was this strength and maturity when his own daughter needed him? Mai grew up to be something of a shut-in, doing remote IT work from home. Honestly, she's worse off than Keisuke, because at least when his life froze, he was already out in the world with other connections. The first thing Takai does is push her daughter to get a new job, which ultimately leads to Mai falling in love herself. But there are little reminders of the years she lost. As they reach a point where Mai's planning her own wedding, she's at a complete loss about practically everything. Takai finally gets a little exasperated and asks, "Well, haven't you been to any of your friends' weddings?" And Mai has to remind her that she doesn't have any friends. It was kind of a punch in the gut at a point in the story when things were really looking up for everyone, but also a perfect reminder of this show's optimism. TsumaSho really sends the message that it's never too late to pick yourself back up and start recovering and moving forward again, and I can't even describe how much I loved to see that. Between Chika initially trying to solve her problems with another relationship before finally realizing she needs to focus on herself first, and Keisuke being inspired by his daughter's bravery and happiness, the adults in this series are continuing to learn and grow as much as the children are, and that's one of the realest things I've ever seen in anime. And luckily, Keisuke does start to shape up, just in time for Mai to become the child in that relationship once more, as Takai starts to have some suspicions about this reincarnation business. But I don't want to spoil everything. TsumaSho was such a pleasant surprise. I really started this one on a whim with no idea what to expect. The characters and their relationships were all great. The way the story came together really impressed me. I feel like this series has flown under the radar a bit, but I highly recommend it for anyone looking for a good story about grief, love, and family. Thank you for watching.